At one point in my life, I actually had an arc as the president of a fraternity, professional fraternity that is, so a little different than the traditional fraternities that you might be thinking of. It was co-ed, had people from all over the world. It was an incredible experience. And it's been coming up for me more in conversation with one of my friends who's stepping into a position of leadership at work. And as I've had in conversations with him, I've continued to draw upon my experience from that time because a lot of those lessons I learned even as a 21, 22-year-old college senior leading a group of other college students still holds true even in the real world, let's call it that, even as adults, because ultimately it's about human beings, it's about people and our connection with one another that defines leadership. So whether it's leading a group in a project at school, whether you are the CEO of a huge company, whatever the case may be, I believe that these lessons still hold true. And I thought I would share them with you. And the first that I've heard and resonates with me is that leaders often don't choose to be leaders. Leadership often finds them. And that was definitely the case for me. To paint you a picture of who I was when I was running for this role, much less even had I don't know, the wherewithal to even throw my name in the ring, I was quiet, at least in the sphere of my fraternity, which, for those wondering, it's Alpha Kappa Psi, aka Psi. I wasn't a really vocal member of the fraternity. I wasn't, you know, always voicing my beliefs or opinions. I was just sort of there, one of the silent many. And I don't think I would have really been the first, not think, I know I wasn't the first name that came to mind when people would think of for being president. There are other brothers, that's what we call them, even though we were co-ed. Feels kind of weird. There are other brothers in my grade who even I, in some sense, felt were more suited for the role. They'd been in the fraternity a year longer than I had. I joined when I was a sophomore. They joined when I was a freshman. They were more vocal than I was, which, well, I guess that means they hold respect, right? At least so I thought. And they also were just, I don't know, killing it. Academically, professionally, which I was too, but it feels like they were really the full package and they oozed the kind of confidence and charisma that, or as we like to talk about in our fraternity, executive presence that a leader would have. And I didn't really feel like I had any of that, to be totally honest with you. What I did have, though, and what was really true in my heart, was that I deeply cared about the people. I deeply cared about the people. The most important thing, the most impactful thing I'd gotten from my experience was the relationships I'd made in the fraternity. I really felt like I finally had a community, a family I could call my own that I didn't really have my first year of college. And that's the most important thing, at least to me, are the relationships and the connections you have with one another. And I wanted to, and I really felt called to, as if I truly felt that I was the only person capable in my entire grade, in the entire fraternity, that was present at that time, fit for this role. Truly. Not fit in the sense of, you know, accomplishments or, again, like the confidence and the charisma and whatnot, but the care and the love for people. That's what inspired me more than anything to run, even when I didn't feel so sure in myself. And it was going to be a challenging year. This was going into 2020 and 2021, which was really the height of the pandemic. Everything was online. We weren't in person for anything, even though we were on campus. So it was going to be a really difficult year, a really new year, one that would especially need a lot of human connection, especially when that was getting taken away from us with the pandemic. And I'm just looking at some things here. What I realized from getting elected, which I'll talk about in a second, is that people care more about who you are more than what you do. It's like that Maya Angelou quote that goes, I have it written down here. I've learned that people forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's really how I sought to be as president. It wasn't about what I did, it was about how people felt. It's always about how people feel. And it's about whether they feel seen, heard, understood, and valued. Especially when it comes to, well, one, leadership, and two, going into this period of just confusion, uncertainty, and whatnot that the pandemic brought. And so when I was quarantining, so I got sent home from studying abroad, I was alone in this, you know, place by myself, self-quarantining. I made this spreadsheet because that's how I was at the time. I made a spreadsheet with different tabs and put down names of people from every corner, every walk of life within the fraternity. I had grades, freshman, sophomore, junior, the different pledge classes, the different families, all of that. And I had this list of people, and during my time in quarantine and leading up to the election, I reached out to pretty much all of them, I would say, to have a one-on-one call and to just ask them questions. I don't exactly recall what they were. They were something like, well, one, just checking on how they were during all of this happening with the pandemic. And then asking them questions about, what's been the most meaningful part about your experience in AK Psi? What does AK Psi mean to you? What do you want the identity of AK Psi to be? Like, what does it mean to be an AK Psi? What are the values? Questions like that. And I asked that to every single person and, really tried to get an idea about what is this collective meaning, intention that we want to create, that we want to bring into this year ahead. Because ultimately, it's not about, at least to me, it's not about your platform. Your platform is just an expression of the values, the needs, the aspirations and intentions of those that you represent. And I've noticed that in the past, when I would observe and vote in prior elections that I'd been a part of, is that the platforms just seemed sort of disconnected, not really built on anything foundational, just sexy ideas that were just sort of cobbled together and not really there to support anything, more of there just to have it, because you need to have something to show for yourself when you're running. But I wanted mine to really be about connection, and I might even share the slide deck I made if I have it somewhere. Because that was the most important thing to me, and that was the most important thing I heard from everyone I talked to. It's about connection. And when when I gave my speech and talked about my platform over Zoom, I was nervous as hell. Because again, I was not used to talking in front of such a huge room, not in this context of running for a role like president. Because as president, and I'll talk more about this later, you are the representation of this collective. And that's a beautiful responsibility to carry. And I didn't have much experience in this context. My only prior role was when I was the public relations director. And I think I ran uncontested, which often happens in these elections for some of these roles at times. So, I didn't have too much actual speaking experience, so I was nervous. The other two people I was running against, they did. And, I don't remember exactly much about the platforms themselves, but when all was said and done and we were whisked off to the Zoom breakout room while the rest of the fraternity voted, came back and I heard my name announced as president. And I think the mind wasn't really expecting me to win because the mind was really insecure and whatnot. But deep down, as I was telling you, there was this feeling that once more, this is meant to be. I'm meant to be in this role, navigating this time with everyone. And when I heard from some friends who were in the fraternity and participating in the election, if I recall correctly, I don't think the odds were in my favor, because of the things like popularity, because of, you know, how verbose they were in, the chapter and whatnot. And then someone asked, how many people, how many of you were reached out to by X, Y, and Z? Each of us three running. The first candidate, a handful. Second candidate, also a handful. And in both cases, probably just friends or members of their family, which are just groups within the fraternity. And then for me, more than half the room had raised their hand, like over 40 people or something. And then it was over at that point. So once again, leadership is not about an individual. It's about being the expression of the collective. And how can you be the expression of the collective if you're not connecting with the collective? And once more, it's not about your achievements, your doings, how loud you talk, how eloquently or confidently you talk, but how you are, how you show up, how you make people feel. Yeah. I'll also name that once I got into leadership, especially in that way, I realized that it's not about, especially in a role like being the president, you're actually not really there to do anything in the sense that you're not really on the ground, you know, putting together events or hosting things all the time. That's not your role anymore, as it might have been when I was the PR director. Your role as a leader is to empower others to be great at what they're great at, to do what they enjoy, to step into their potential. That's all it's about. That's the most important thing. Is ultimately these people who step into these other roles of leadership within the fraternity, the executive board as we called it, they run for a reason. They run for things that, speak to them, that they want to be doing. And as president, if you're trying to do everything, if you're trying to have your hands in everything, all that communicates is that you don't fully trust people. And without trust, there's no connection. Without connection, there is no organization. Leadership falls apart. And I've been the recipient of this later in my life when I've joined the workforce and whatnot and had micromanagers and whatnot. It is just the most, yeah, it's just not a pleasant experience when you don't feel trusted and when people aren't willing to listen. So just trusting people to show up for what they signed up to show up for, and how do you support them in that? And more importantly, not assuming you know what support means to them and actually asking them about it. So instead of, you know, trying to, manage everything or manage everyone, I just let people do what they were supposed to do, what they wanted to do. And myself and my VP, we would just have check-in calls every couple weeks or so and just ask how things are, how they are, and ask them what sort of support do you need from us. That's it. That's all I really needed to do. And I don't know, I feel like it's a lot simpler than we often make it out to be in leadership and just in life in general. Ask people what they need. Ask people what fosters trust, safety, belonging, what feels like support for them, and do that. And it was the same thing when it came to running our our board meetings. Sounds funny to say that. Our board meetings. I truly, and I communicated this with everyone, that we're all equal. That everyone's voice matters, whether you are I think we call them nibs, newly initiated brothers, whether you are a nib, whether you are a senior, whether you are the president or the PR director or the historian. The historian is just the person who like takes photos and does social media and whatnot, which is an important role. But it might not seem that way compared to say like the president or the vice president or something. But those are just words if you don't cultivate an environment and a space for that. You can say we're all equal, all our voices matter, but it's another thing if people feel that way. And that all comes back down to actually, making sure and asking people what facilitates that. And I'm pretty sure, again, this is like at this point, like over 4 years ago. We had conversations like this at the start about how do we want these meetings to go? How do we want our internal board to be, and how similar that is to the collective organization. And that's how our meetings were. I will say, hmm, I recognize this in myself, this, yeah, this tendency to want to please. There's a part of me that wants to really be liked and to not step on anyone's toes and to make sure everyone's included. I am that person. And I can imagine you see how that carries into leadership, at least in the way that I've been talking about it with how I led. And at the same time, that is important. And as a leader, especially when you are in the position of, say, the president of something, you need to make hard decisions. That is ultimately the role and responsibility you stepped into, is that you are the one with final say. And yes, it's important to hear voices, to hear people. Ultimately, it comes through you at times, especially during difficult decision-making processes. And that was challenging for me because I didn't want to make a wrong decision. I always wanted to make the right decision. But the truth is, there is never a right or wrong decision. It just doesn't exist because everyone is unique. Everyone has different circumstances they've been born into, different experiences and conditionings that shape their view, the lens of the world that they perceive everything through. So whatever you feel is right is going to be someone's wrong, and vice versa. And ultimately, I truly believe that you just have to follow your intuition. You have to follow your gut. You have to follow what feels true in your heart. Just as much as I did when I decided to run in the first place. And that's not easy. At least it wasn't for me. Because I knew people would disagree with me. I knew that people would be upset with me. But deep down, and whether or not I realized this at the time or maybe in hindsight, I had to trust that people knew, and this is important in leadership, is that it comes from your heart, that it comes from pure intentions, that you're not, and what I mean by this is, once more, it's not about the words, it's not about the action, it's not about the doing, but it's about the being. If people truly know who you are out and not as the president, but who you are as a human being, what it's like to be in your presence, then agree or disagree, they understand you and where you're coming from. And that's where the respect comes in. You can respect someone while still disagreeing with what they say or do or believe in, as long as they know the person beneath it all. And that's something I'd really taken the time to foster way back when I was running and throughout the year as president. Because ultimately, honestly, what I feel like I had this really awesome excuse to do was just to connect with people as president. You know, I really made it my job, unspeakingly, to just show up for everything I could, to show up to all the recruitment events, to show up to any events that my leadership was hosting, to host things for people in the fraternity, to do whatever I could, and to connect with people one-on-one. That's what I made my entire year about, and I feel like just being the president for whatever, you know, reasons, obvious or not, creates a certain platform for you where people want to connect with you for, you know, and I'd like to believe that people wanted to connect with me for who I am rather than, you know, my role, my position. And speaking of, I actually have this quote that I screenshotted from way back when. This is actually from someone's application who later became a brother, and it really meant something to me about how I lead and how I am as a person. The question was, please describe one notable interaction you had with a brother at a recruitment event. And they answered, one notable interaction I had was speaking with Dennis. Before the info session, I had no idea about the internal structure of AK Psi. I didn't know who the president was, or who were the members of the executive board. Some brothers mentioned their position in the fraternity and what initiatives they were involved in. Dennis didn't. Rather than talking about himself, he asked us questions. He seemed like a guy that could put himself in our shoes. Little did I know, he was the president of the executive board of AK Psi and BU. That humbleness that its president demonstrated says a lot about the fraternity and its values. These are people I would feel comfortable around. And what that speaks to, as I've said, is that as a leader, you are just the embodiment of the organization's values. You are just the embodiment of the organization's collective consciousness and way of being. That's it. And that affects everything. That affects the people who are in the organization already. That affects the people who are interested in potentially joining. It's everything. And ultimately, if that isn't aligned with the organization, that's going to cause a lot of difficulty and strife. I will say, one thing I realized, especially during some challenging experiences as president, is that it seems so obvious now, but I don't know. When you're in it, in the thick of it, especially when you're in college, yeah, you really don't realize that people are just messy and human. We are all imperfect. Every single one of us. And that's a beautiful thing, is that we're not. And I think at times, myself included, especially during that time in my life, there's this expectation to be that there is a perfection, that there is a right and a righteousness to aspire towards for everyone. But that's not true. And as a result, we look at what separates us instead of what connects us. You know? And that was challenging. Yeah. I look back at that time and I'm like, gosh, we're all just kids. We're all just kids dressed up in suits, as we do in professional fraternities. And just, yeah, holding roles like president and vice president or whatever else may be. And I don't know, taking ourselves a little too seriously at times. Forgetting that we're all just messy human beings. We all have our unique lens we view the world through. We all have tightly held beliefs loosely held beliefs. We all have challenges that are unspoken of and hidden behind closed doors or armor. And that's okay. That's what connects us all. Hmm. Yeah. So, as a whole, I really enjoyed my experience in leadership. I'm really grateful for it. It taught me a lot, evidently, from what I've said so far about, well, one, leadership, but also about people. That's what leadership's all about. Yeah, and it just really affirmed for me just how much I love and care for people. I really want to support other people. I really want to empower people and to create as fulfilling and nourishing of a an experience and a community for people to be in. And that was a really, really awesome, really huge privilege that got to have as president. So I'm really thankful for it. Hmm. Let me check if there's anything else. That feels it for now for me. If there's anything else, maybe I'll make another video. Maybe I'll make one about my experiences in the fraternity itself for those curious. But otherwise, I appreciate you for sitting down for this conversation with me. Maybe it stirs something in you. Maybe there's some useful insights. Who knows? Regardless, I appreciate you, grateful for you, and have a lovely rest of your day.